Courtney, what is a highly sensitive person? Like, let's do a little bit of table setting. What are we even talking about here?
So that's a very complicated answer.
Yeah, I was just going
So
to duck out for the next hour and a half. You go for it.
having a trauma response. So the best way that it can be described, so Elaine Aron, PhD, she wrote The Highly Sensitive Person, used an acronym, DOES. It's the best thing. D is for depth of processing. We are known to observe and reflect before we act. We process everything more consciously or not. O is for being overstimulated. We get overstimulated by everything and everything that others don't see and tend to usually miss. E is for the emphasis of our emotional reactions and having strong empathy. S is for sensitive to all subtleties in our environment. So we catch everything. All of these things deal with having an over highly sensitive nervous system. We're taking in so much information, it affects every part of us. So we burn out really quickly. And so that's kind of one of the biggest challenges that we have.
We mentioned that research is starting to catch up and I guess catch on to some of these ideas. How do we know that highly sensitive people exist? Like, what sets them apart from the rest of the population?
So what's interesting is that science didn't just start researching this. Pavlov actually started researching it and found that there's a highly sensitive population within dogs. Carl Jung talked about sensitive people a lot. And they have found that over 100 intelligent species, from fruit flies to humans, all have a minority of intelligent, or not intelligent, highly sensitive people. And it is a genetic trait that's inherited. Why? They don't exactly know that we've evolved into this, but there's an increase in dopamine, which there's 19 places in the brain where it makes connections and it transmits information. And because of that, we are able to have this amount of empathy and happy feelings, but then we also have lower serotonin, so we can be more easily depressed. And with that, there's actually benefits, because within rhesus monkeys, they found that those that have this HSP trait, even though they had lower serotonin levels, if they were raised by a good enough caregiver, then they could even be leaders of their groups. They were more cautious and careful, and they have a higher chance for survival. So there's many different kinds of ways that we can really tap into the research. And if we look at the intelligent species, I mean, there's slowness to act in a lot of these situations, which is the hallmark of the trait. That is the big thing. I have always been told that, and Christy, you experienced this with me, slowness to act, to get on to this podcast. I had to really think about it because of the depth of processing. I have taken in all of my experiences and processed it so deeply that I really base my choices and decisions off of those past experiences. I learned a lot from them. And so somebody could avoid them, which I would avoid this in normal situations because it's overstimulating. Other ways that we have seen this is, we can overgeneralize, as I said, which could look like trauma. It looks a lot like trauma, and trauma definitely affects our ability to cope. It looks a lot like anxiety. It looks a lot like stress. We produce more cortisol as well, which is a stress hormone. So that's another reason why we get overstimulated. We just feel things so much more. The best description I could have is, a non-HSP can go sightseeing on vacation all day. They are ready for dinner at night. They can go to the bars, go to party, whatever, have a good time. An HSP Sightseeing is about all they're going to be able to do. They're exhausted. They need to fucking go to sleep. They need to recharge. Otherwise, they're going to be very moody and all of that. We just can't handle as much because we're seeing everything, all the little fine details, which could create, some issues. It looks a little bit like neuroticism. It's really strongly associated with neuroticism, but it is slightly different because of the level of empathy. And it is, tracked in the brain. We have studies that show this is an inherited genetic trait.
Yeah, and I want to quickly mention that there is an incredible amount of research on these topics, and a lot of it that you've sort of highlighted and pulled aside for us. In addition to Elaine Aron's books, there's a number of different studies we can point people towards, and a lot of that is included in the show notes for this episode. So if you're feeling a little bit skeptical, I really challenge and invite people to take a look at that information. Having gone through some of that research, how common is this phenomena? How many people are HSPs?
So we are seen as a minority. So 15 to 20%, probably even less. That's the same amount of percentage seen in animals. It's only a small few. And they're not really sure why, but if everybody was highly sensitive, could you imagine what that would be like? I mean, that would just, that might be great, but then there would be less variation. And, we all have our strengths. So, and something to bring to the table.
Yeah, well, and at the same time, if we're talking about like 1 in 5 or maybe as few as 1 in 10, when you look at, a nuclear family or even a, more tied to our evolutionary history, a band or a group of, anywhere from 10 to 50, you do have a small number of people that are likely going to possess maybe that extra attention to danger, that slightly greater degree of perception and concern.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, it's interesting because not every single child in a family is going to show the trait in the same way. Even though it is inherited, there's been studies on identical twins, and when they're raised in different homes or even the same home, they still act differently in certain behaviors. One might be more highly sensitive because of where they grew up and the kind of caregiving they received. So, it's either we're highly sensitive or we're not. But those highly sensitive traits, again, are expressed in different behaviors, which is really important to understand as well. Like, we not only are sensitive to emotions, we're also sensitive to, people's moods around us, the environment, the energy of the room, any kind of negativity, information, noises, smells, textures of fabrics. The list goes on and on.
So I haven't done too much research into this prior to this conversation. I've heard the term. I know a couple people who identify as HSP. Is it HSP or HSPs? Because it can't be peoples.
I guess it's HSP.
Sorry, my grammar, my inner editor is going nuts right now trying to figure out how to
correct me. All good.
But I guess my question is, I never attributed that to myself. I do know that I have anxiety, and I know that you said some of these things can look similar to anxiety, similar to trauma. But I guess I'm wondering because I'm hearing a lot of myself in everything that you're saying, but I also it's triggering that same thing that like zodiac sign would, where I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds like me. Like I can remember times where that happened to me. So how are we differentiating between personal experience that is valid and is like your experience, how you go through the world, and Barnum statements and having people say, yeah, I've been bothered by a smell before, or yeah, I've picked up on the energy of a room before. So I guess I'm curious, is there any research in terms of like how to differentiate between the two?
Yeah. So it all depends on how we bounce back as well. So there's many things here, especially with the anxiety. I mean, a lot of people feel anxiety. And I think that with highly sensitive people, this anxiety comes and goes, and just like anybody else's, but it is way more intense. And it is stimulation related. So if you can imagine that. So when you have anxiety, what is your anxiety related to? Even though I know this isn't therapy and that's your personal stuff.
Right.
But, just curious.
Yeah, I actually just talked about this in a live stream I did earlier today. A lot of it is related to looking towards the future and worrying about things like money, like health. It can be influenced by how well I slept the night before, or if I've eaten something that day. So those have been like the kind of triggers and things that have worked in my experience.
Yeah, and sometimes it's harder to differentiate. There are studies all about it. I don't know them by heart, but, and I'm just being real and honest, but, it's something that we have to look deeper and further. And I'd have to talk to you for a lot longer to be able to, help you differentiate the two. There comes a sense of knowing also. There's a higher level of intuition. So many other factors at play that can't just be seen within the anxiety. That just happens to be a symptom because of an overactive nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
You could do some brain studies if you'd like to see what your levels are. That would give you the best indication of serotonin levels, dopamine levels, and cortisol levels.
Okay.
Well, and
Awesome.
which you're hitting on one of the tricky pieces of all of this, which is that it is something that is kind of defined by self-report. There are a number of tests that you can take and little assessments you can give yourself to try to answer the question, am I a highly sensitive person? And we've got links to those in the show notes as well. But to your point, I guess the concordance to like those Barnum statements and people who feel like they are HSPs, we can then take these self-reports and these assessments and these people who identify as an HSP, and we've done some studies involving fMRIs. We've looked at dopamine receptors and things along those lines to confirm that people who self-report as a HSP often are responding to those chemicals in different ways and having a different neurological experience.
Interesting.
Different parts of the brain light up for other people. And, just like I was talking about the dopamine earlier, the study that went into non-HSPs versus HSPs, they show pictures of strangers and of loved ones, happy, sad, all different emotions. And HSPs in particular showed like an incredible light up of dopamine when they saw happy strangers and happy loved ones. Like it was all consuming and lit up the brain. Whereas in non-HSPs, that did not happen. They did not react as strongly. And there was something else I was going to say, but I don't remember. It'll come back to me. But yeah.
Well, what I'm curious about is whether or not, perception or sensitivity or however we want to frame it, whether it works on a spectrum, whether we consider HSPs to just be like the top, 15% of like a wide spectrum of human behavior, or if there is a meaningful gene that we maybe haven't isolated yet that really sets apart like a top tier and a distant second tier.
What do you mean by top and second tier? Are you referring to like one being inferior than the other, or?
No, not in terms of hierarchy, but just the question of if somebody takes a HSP self-report test, for instance, let's of course acknowledge that those tests are that they're tricky and the validity of them can be a little wishy-washy oftentimes. But nevertheless, if somebody just misses the cutoff and is maybe not given that label of HSP, should we consider them 3/4 HSP, or is there like a meaningful distinction between people in one group and people in another?
The inherited trait. I mean, it comes down to the genetics. And, I am not a biologist. I am not a scientist. So that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, there's some gene we haven't maybe isolated yet.
An inherited genetic trait. And, we've bred dogs and other animals to be more sensitive. That's how we have dogs today. These domesticated animals, we found that this sensitive trait was so attractive. We wanted that. And so that's what we did over and over again until we have dogs today. And other animals and species have been bred with this sensitive gene. So, it comes down to genetics. That's the best way I could answer that. But empathy still does exist in non-HSPs. So we're not the only ones that have this ability. But what that difference is that, I can feel the person next door's emotions. I don't need to see their face or talk to them to get the mirror neurons to feel empathy. I can feel it just in somebody's story. Just through words, I am flooded with emotions. It works in a very mysterious way that is hard for me to describe.
Sure. Well, if somebody is listening to this now and is starting to have those questions about themselves, certainly, again, we might point them towards Aaron's test and to look at themselves through that lens. But what happens next? If you find out that you are a highly sensitive person, what do you do about it?
I would seek out psychotherapy. That is not the end all, absolute best thing for you. If it's not for you, don't do it. There's plenty of self-help stuff out there that's possible to use. But, the number one thing is reframing past experiences. Since we process so deeply, we ingrain really negative experiences and we can have really low self-esteem due to it. We can have a lot of anxiety around things and a lot of fear based off of our traumas. And, those negative comments really stick in your head. And so I would suggest starting to reframe that. What was that?
Sorry.
It's okay.
Too close to a highway.
So we start reframing that. We approach it exactly with what's going on at the time it was going on and reframing it for this situation now, which also involves reparenting yourself. Which is a big deal, parts work and looking at yourself in a compassionate way. You need to start healing yourself and gross acceptance of who you are, because so often your experience was not validated. People told you were too sensitive, too shy, too introverted. People probably said a lot of hurtful things. And so, you need that compassion, and that's going to be the most important thing. And taking breaks. Oh my God, breaks. We are not non-HSPs. We cannot just fucking run like machines. We were trained that way in a society full of, non-highly sensitive people. That's what this society is built on. And so we don't exactly fit in to that. We can excel in careers, but it's more difficult. So know your limits, know your body, listen to your body, be doing things that calm the nervous system, like grounding, breathing, deep belly breathing, yoga if you can. Good Lord, yoga, meditation. These are so important. Yeah.
No, I can definitely echo a lot of that. Just in general, I think that's really good advice, right? Deep breaths, take breaks. I think more and more we're seeing not only this potentially more scientific push towards, hey, here's how people, experience the world differently and interact differently and have various levels of interaction and perception, but also we are having this understanding of, oh, and also our society is kind of crap right now. And like the concept of, you know, burnout culture and grind culture where people feel guilty for taking breaks or for, you know, going shopping and not ordering out because it takes longer. Like all of this is kind of converging, I think, into hopefully a really productive conversation about self-care in general.
God, we need more self-care as a society. And, you know, this quarantine experience has been difficult for a lot of people, especially the ones that love the grind, that love to work hard, that don't love to sit still and sit and hang out with themselves. It is a major issue, and especially for highly sensitive people, because not only are we feeling that stress, but then we're feeling world stress and the state of the world. And it's scary. It's bringing out a lot of people's anxieties and fears right now. So yeah, self-care, man. I can't say that enough. We gotta eat well. We gotta take care of the vessel that we're in.
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, now more than ever. And I'm actually really excited to get into a little bit more about what this means and what we should be doing about it, if this label fits us or fits our partners or things like that.